We are trying to get to 20,000 subscribers on Unfound's YouTube channel before the end of 2023. Have you signed up yet? Paige Marie Renkoski was a 30-year-old from Okemos, Michigan. She was a substitute teacher and engaged to be married. On May 24th, 1990, Paige dropped off her mother at the Detroit airport and was heading to her fiance's softball game. She didn't show up. The car Paige was driving was found idling and in good condition on a highway near Fowlerville. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. There is a term I have for disappearances that do not fit into any specific category. The reason they don't could be for a variety of reasons. Unique person, unique circumstances, or a combination of both. The label I use for these cases is a league of their own. Some examples from Unfound's own catalog. Dale Kerstetter. Really, how many security guards have gone missing on the job, no matter if a theft took place or not? Flight 370. In this age of digital tracking, who would have thunk that a commercial airliner could go missing for this long? Jason Jolkowski. Young, sober, mentally stable men just don't go missing in their own neighborhoods while walking to catch rides to work in broad daylight. And Angie Yarnell. How is it even possible that her husband got away with his story? He went to jail for 4 years, yet Angie is still missing. To be clear, though, those are extreme examples. Sometimes it only takes one subtle nuance to put a disappearance in this very rare category. Well, with the disappearance of Paige Renkoski, this is what we have. With some just very slight differences that I will discuss in my summation, her case would be very common. Instead, it's one of a kind. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Linez's website, charleyproject.org. There was nothing anyone could have ever said truthfully bad about Paige Renkoski. She had no vices, no addictions. Paige was close to her family, even driving her mother to the airport on the day of Paige's disappearance. Paige loved kids, so she was a babysitter. In addition, she loved children so much, she was a substitute teacher, and we know how difficult that job can be. Paige had a man in her life, and they were engaged, although a firm date for a wedding had not yet been set. The only bad thing anyone could have said remotely bad about Paige is that she might have been a bit too trusting. So, on May 24th, 1990, using her mother's car, Paige drove her mother to the Detroit airport. From there, Paige met a friend at a park in Canton Township. Paige was her regular self. After a couple of hours, Paige had to leave because she was attending her fiance's softball game that evening. However, she never arrived. Once an APB was put out for Paige, her mother's car was found on I-96 just outside Fowlerville. It was idling with no signs of damage or disrepair. Everything that Paige had with her that day was still in her car, even her shoes. She was never seen again. Once word got out about Paige, several people called police, saying that they had seen Paige at the location where the car was found, talking to at least one man who drove a maroon SUV or van-like vehicle. This man has never been identified. Although violent crime has come down in the United States since Paige's disappearance, the roads of this country are still very dangerous, with road rage, stalkers, drive-bys, and many other incidents where people are injured, if not killed. Please ponder this as you also try to answer these 3 questions during the interview. Number 1, what would cause you to pull over to the side of a highway even though your vehicle is in perfect working condition? Number 2, why did over 40 witnesses see Paige talking to this man, but not one saw her get into the van by choice or by force? And number 3, despite his alibi, could Paige's fiancé still be the main instigator of her disappearance? Paige's family has no doubt foul play is the cause of her disappearance. The guests for this episode are Paige's sister, Michelle Hollis, and Paige's niece, Nikki Hollis. Unfound News. This coming Monday, July 17th, 2023, and from now on, the Unfound Live Show will be available on YouTube, Unfound's discussion group on Facebook, Unfound's Facebook page, and Twitter. I hope you will all join in. Next, another unfound disappearance has been resolved. Jordan Carvalho, who went missing from Golden Valley, Arizona, on September 1st, 2019, was found deceased in Golden Valley in September 2022. His remains were finally identified through DNA this past week. No cause of death has been made public. Finally, I will be in Pennsylvania seeing my dad from July 19th to August 2nd. I will also be playing in a disc golf tournament there on July 29th. I do not expect any changes to Unfound's schedule for the podcast, the live show, or any other Unfound productions. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the sister of Paige Renkoski, Michelle Renkoski Hollis, and Nikki Hollis, Paige's niece. Nikki and Michelle, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
As we just about always do when we have family members on Unfound to do interviews, we always start with that family, getting to know a little of the culture of the family, anything that the guest or guests might think the audience needs to know about the family. So we'll start with you, Michelle. What can you say? Of course, being Paige's sister, what would you say some qualities about the Renkoski family? What can you say?
Well, growing up, I had, there were 4 of us daughters, of course, and we did a lot of regular family things. We were super close with friends and neighbors in the neighborhood and with our cousins and that type of thing. And just kind of a regular 70s family, nothing wildly different on any of our ends. I think we're pretty normal family.
Okay, 4 daughters, huh? No
Yes.
sons.
Nope, just the boyfriends.
Wow. Just the boyfriends. Okay. And maybe we should clarify. Paige is your older or a younger sister?
She is my second oldest sister. I am number 4 and she was number 2.
Oh, okay.
So she was kind of
okay. And how
there.
many years difference between the 2 of you?
6 years.
All right. Not far away, but not close either. So, for example, she would have been a senior in high school and you were like 6th or 7th grade, something like that.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
So we didn't really grow up at those times. She was doing different things and I was climbing trees and, she was doing high school things. So
Right. Would you say that your 4 sisters, including Paige, all very similar, all outgoing, different personalities? What would you say?
Oh, I would say different personalities altogether. Each one of us had our own spot.
Okay.
Definitely.
All right, very good. Nikki, I'll move to you. What would you, of course, this would be your, I guess your mother's side of the family. Of course, Michelle is your mother. What would you say, maybe growing up, what are some things maybe you'd like to say about the Renkoski side of your family?
Let's see, we've all kind of been scattered across the state of Michigan. So, usually getting together for holidays, birthdays, things like that. Um, but we usually just kind of went to whoever's house and spent the holiday, usually my grandma's house, my mom's mom. We spent a lot of time there and just kind of hung out and did random regular things.
Okay. All right. And Nikki, we can have a good conversation being that we have a mother and daughter here. Do you remember the first time in your life when you discovered that you had an aunt that was missing?
I don't remember the first time because I know my mom had kind of explained when I was pretty young that, she was lost. I don't remember that conversation much. What sticks out to me is more of that like middle school, early high school, when I could really understand what was going on and try to, get involved and do all my research and things like that.
Okay, and we're certainly going to get into how you got involved a little later in this interview. I think that'll be very interesting for everybody. Moving back to Michelle, is that a conscious thing? You have a daughter. You're going to have. You have. I don't know if you have other kids or not.
Yes, I
None
have
of
two
my
daughters.
business. Okay, but is that something you consciously tell yourself? Having a sister's missing, one of these days I'm going to have to explain this to my kids. Did you have like, well, when they get to 10 years old or 8 years old, is that something that goes through your mind, or did it just kind of happen organically?
It just really happened, spur of the moment kind of thing. As both of my daughters got a little bit older, because Nikki has an older sister, 2 years older than she is, and I would just kind of keep it age appropriate. Auntie Paige
Mhm.
was lost, but then things would happen with that within our family sometimes. There'd be some new investigation or some new tip that would hear of. And, I never involved them in that till they were older and they could understand what was going on and what really had happened.
Mhm.
Because there's not a whole lot to our story, compared to
Right.
other missing person stories. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, little by little, as they got older and it just seemed to be the right time, I would give them more information.
Now, of course, I don't have anybody missing in my family, and I don't have any kids either, so I can't put myself in
Mm,
either of your positions there, Michelle, regarding that. But maybe going back to Nikki, did you kind of know that you had an aunt that was missing even before maybe, or your older family members told you, or was it like kind of out of the blue that you heard that?
I think it was just more like question marks of like kind of knowing something was off or different, but not having, a full understanding. And, kind of how my mom mentioned that she didn't really talk to us about it too much. I don't remember like overhearing a lot. So it was really until, we were old enough to hear about it that we really had, those bigger conversations.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on now to talking about Paige. Michelle, what are some of the things that, when you think about Paige today, other than her, of course, her disappearance, which of course is the forefront, things about her personality, what can you tell her, the listeners about that, about Paige?
Paige was very bubbly. She was very outgoing. Everybody loved Paige and loved to be around her. When my friends would come over, growing up, they would love it when she would hang out with us like a big sister, for them as well. She she had a very quirky sense of humor. Like it's hard to even explain, but just doing silly things, making a funny sound, a funny face, that kind of thing. She would do. So she had a really good sense of humor. Even sometimes, maybe when it wasn't also appropriate, she would just do something goofy. And so yeah, bubbly, outgoing, love to be around lots of people.
What were some of her interests? Was she into sports, into music? What was
I
she
would say
kind of pick?
music. She was in some in high school. She was in a couple choral groups and rock group that the high school had at the time, and so she loved music. She loved to do and be involved with um, different types of modeling for some of the local stores and that type of thing. She was
Okay.
really like that. Hmm.
Okay. And what about, of course, you have two other sisters. What kind of relationship did she have with your two other sisters? Very close or what?
I would say pretty close because they were all pretty close in age as well. They were, 3 years apart, basically, almost a little bit more, but um, yeah. So I was, 5 years behind them. So they were
Mhm.
all pretty close in high school at the same time, but
Okay.
all very different. They all had their very different personalities. But yes, close. You know.
Okay.
Mhm.
And Nikki, going to you, you've of course been working on this, and we want to get into that a little later. Maybe some things maybe you learned about Paige, during your work. Is there maybe a funny story that you've come across and learning about her, and putting her name out there as being a missing person? Anything that comes to mind when you think of Paige that you've learned?
Not really. Not a lot of stories, but just kind of soaking up all of these, fun things about her personality. And, I think that kind of runs in my family, all of our weird little quirks and just
Uh-huh.
being goofy together.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to this regarding school and how did she do in school? Just going back to Michelle. Have boyfriends in high school? Did she go to college? What can you say about all of that?
Oh, there were always boyfriends between all of my sisters. But I didn't really like that because I was younger and I was out playing in the yard with my friends and uh, not uh, really involved with them in high school. But she definitely had lots of boyfriends as my other sisters kind of, all at the same time. There's always a boy coming over for dinner or hanging out at the house or, standing in the garage when I wouldn't let them in because we had a rule that boys couldn't be in the house if my parents weren't around.
Hmm.
And I was kind of the watchdog for a little while.
Ah, okay. Did
So,
did uh, did Paige and the other sisters ever try to bribe you?
oh, I'm sure they did. I
Okay.
don't recall specifically, but yeah, I'm pretty sure they did.
Okay. All right. What about she graduated from high school, right?
Yep, she graduated from high school. We all went to the same high school.
Okay.
And then she went to Lansing Community College. Off and on, didn't really go till a little later. She didn't, I don't think she started right out of high school. It was a little later. And so yeah, no, as I wasn't up on her grades. I didn't even really
Mm,
live in the same state for several years when she disappeared. So I had been not
okay.
living in Michigan. I'd been in Georgia, so in Atlanta.
Okay. All right. And what was she working then after she got out of high school and there was like a period between?
Oh
What kind of jobs
yeah.
did she have? I've read that she was like a babysitter
Yeah, she
and maybe
preschool. She
eventually
worked
was
in
a
a
substitute
preschool.
teacher. Yeah. Okay.
Yep, substitute preschool. And then she also worked at Mr. Steak, which was a local steakhouse here in town. So between the two of those kept her quite busy.
Okay. And where was she living at the time, like in her 20s? We're going to eventually talk about how she was engaged and everything, but in her 20s, like
Mm,
when she was going to community college, was she still living at home? Did she get her own place? What was her
oh
business?
gosh. See,
Any
I wasn't
ideas?
paying attention then. I wasn't paying attention then. She was back and forth. I know she lived here at the house that I am currently living in, my mom's house. And
Okay.
yeah, she lived here for quite a long time. And
Okay.
had moved out a few, I think maybe just once or twice, as she was in her mid 20s.
Hmm.
Didn't like just living at home. So
Okay. Let's, all right. So what would you say once again? I realize you're not following her 24/7, but give maybe the audience a little sense of Paige in her 20s. Just living at home, going to work, things like that.
living at home, going to work again. I was a mid
Mm,
teenager, so I
yeah.
wasn't later teen, and then I moved away. I moved away when I was 19.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Right.
so
Okay.
yeah, so I really there's a big chunk of time that I wasn't
Mhm.
living with her directly and would talk on the phone and that kind of thing, and should write a letter, when people used to write letters or send a card kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yes.
But yeah, so she was here back and forth with my mom. She lived, I know she had an apartment for a while. I don't really know when that was. I would say her mid 20s,
In
her own
20s.
place kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. How often would you say in her 20s? Of course, we know that she was a little older than that when she went missing, but how
Mm.
often would you talk to her? How often would you see her? I mean, if you're living in another state, maybe not seeing her that often, how often would you talk to her?
Right. Oh gosh. Yeah, I would say every few weeks, a couple, 2, 3 times a month, would talk and, what's going on and, how are the jobs and that kind of thing. And so, and then there'd be little maybe lapses of time that we wouldn't talk as much. And that was before cell phones. So you had to
Right,
make
it
that,
certainly was.
and wait till you could talk, call long distance after 7 or whatever it was. And, uh, so yeah, I would say 2, 3 times a month.
All right. Well, once again, I realize you were not following your sisters around. Would you say that your other two sisters' experiences very similar to yours as far as talking to her, seeing her? Very similar?
Think so. My older sister had moved away again. Tammy, she was out of state by then for her job. And but when I lived in Atlanta, my sister Cheryl was down there as well. So the two of us were out of state for several years, especially when she disappeared. But even prior to that. But yes, they would talk to her just as often
Okay.
checking in. We all
So you're
checked
all
in
very,
with each other.
all right. So you're close, all four of you pretty close, and
Yeah.
not no estrangements. Sometimes, sisters, brothers, they get estranged for whatever reasons, but you
Yeah.
four kept in touch. And what about your parents? Similar situation, keeping in touch with everybody?
Um, Yeah, I think so. I would say just a regular conversations, checking in, that kind of thing. Again, that was before cell phones. So if you weren't right by the phone, you'd miss the call and have to, check back in. And especially with our parents, they'd check in pretty frequently.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And once again, you at the time of her disappearance, you were not in Michigan.
No, no, I had lived in Georgia. I was in Atlanta. And so was my next up sister, the third daughter, Cheryl. She's
Okay.
still in Atlanta. And
Okay. Okay.
so yeah, so yep, I'd been there, I think 90, I'd been there 3 years, I think.
Okay. All
three
right. Very
years.
good. Let's move on to this. Now, she did have a relationship at the time. A guy who's been called a fiance. You can certainly clarify that if that's not true. If it's true, what can you say about this guy? Do you know how the two met? Did you ever meet him before the disappearance? Or
Hmm.
I mean, I've seen this picture back from 1990. You sitting on the
Right.
couch,
The
he's
couch
sitting
picture,
right there.
yeah.
So you two eventually did meet. But
Hmm.
did you meet him before she went missing? What can you say about that?
Yeah, a few months before Paige went missing, she and Steve came down to Atlanta because our first nephew was born. So they came down for that, shortly after he was born. And so that was the first time I think I ever met him because I'd been gone, I wasn't around. And um so yeah, I was just I don't like remember anything vividly, good, bad, otherwise. It was just, oh, okay, this is the new boyfriend. We're thinking about getting engaged, all that kind of thing. And I think they
Mhm.
already were, but it was kind of talk. It wasn't official yet.
Okay.
So
Any memory on how they met?
no, when you had mentioned that before, and I thought I don't know how they met.
Okay.
Um, they may have met at a softball game of all
Oh,
places, but maybe I don't know if that's true.
okay.
Um,
Uh, and did you leading up to her disappearance? And I'm not trying to lead you or anything. Were you getting any like through the grapevine anything that was going on in their relationship or anything like that? This is just an example.
yeah,
One of your
okay.
other sisters talking to you on the phone. Well, you know what? I don't know if Paige and her guy are getting along. I know they're engaged, but they're not getting along that well. Anything like that before the disappearance happened that you can remember?
Well, from what I know, like a lot of couples that are they're trying to figure out, are we going to get married? Are we not? That kind of
Mhm.
thing. She did go back and forth a few times between living at my mom's house and living with Steve because she did move in with him at one point. I don't know when that was.
Okay.
So there were times where she'd spend a few days back at my mom's and they weren't getting along great or couldn't agree upon things, or I don't really even know you know,
Mhm.
what the conversation was. But yeah, there were those times back and forth, but not like a big breakup or, we're done or any of that.
Okay. Very
It was just
good.
like we need a few days apart kind of thing.
Okay.
So
All right, just some general questions there in the outline. Then I want to talk to you a little bit, Nikki, before we actually get into the circumstances of that day. Anyone, the way you remember it, Michelle, anyone worried about Paige at all in 1990? Any decisions that she was making, anything that she was saying, any people that she was running into? Did you ever say, for example, I think somebody's stalking me? Anybody worried about Paige at all?
I would say no. Not that I knew about. I think my mom would have mentioned something to me. My mom and I spoke frequently, and
Mhm.
I think she would have mentioned something about that if that was ever brought up, you
Okay.
know. So
Nothing
no,
like
there was.
for once again, this is just an example.
Mhm.
She's engaged, but maybe there's like an ex-boyfriend or something who,
Well, there are a
kind
lot
of,
of exes.
but you know what I mean, kind of popping
Yeah.
in, she's somewhere and, some ex-boyfriend just happens to be in the same store or something, really
Hmm.
stalking, but acting like, what just happened to be, it's coincidental, but it's not anything like that that comes to mind at all.
Yeah, not that specifically at all. I didn't know her group of friends. I didn't really know. I'd been gone a few years, so that can change in the 20s pretty significantly. So I
Right.
don't really know anything that would have happened like that or that she would have been concerned of.
Okay. And I just have to ask, this is always a question in
Mhm.
any interview. Any addictions, any vices, anything like that that Paige had?
No, not at the time at all. I mean, she went out with her friends, and but nothing my mom was ever concerned about or there was any family issue.
Okay.
A lot of people ask that, and so
Okay. Yeah.
I don't have much to say about that.
Okay. So things in 1990 were just another year for Paige and your family.
Yeah,
Nothing unusual and even since then that's ever come up.
no,
Okay. Nikki,
yeah,
I'm now
no.
going to bring back to you. Of course, you're very young. I'm 52, so I was 20 years old in 1990. So I remember it, that year very well. I just finished my freshman year in college. How is this as a very young person? You look back at 1990, does that seem like it's like so far away? And how do you, wrap your mind around that? Of course, in an era before internet and cell phones, all these things that today certainly can help, us find missing people. How does 1990 strike you as a person who was not alive at that time?
Um, the 90s in general doesn't seem too far away because I was still born in that era.
Okay. Okay.
Just a few years later.
Okay.
So, but my time existing in that time frame, I don't have a lot of memories.
Yeah.
So when I did start to have memories later on in my childhood, you know, it was all of the technology developing, since I was born. So
Okay.
yes, I remember like the dial-up computer and things like that,
Okay. All
the
right.
phone.
Yes.
But for the most part, technology has just continued advancing and hasn't been too chaotically different
I
from
guess
what
what
I
I'm
would
all,
have.
yeah, I guess what I'm also asking, when you decided to get involved and everything, was it like, man, it feels like I'm going back to like the early 1900s when we start talking about no internet and we have to go to newspapers.com to find articles or
Yeah,
going
I
to
mean,
how did it feel?
it just kind of sucks. Like it's like you kind of wish that it happened, in modern day time because I think that has caused a lot of barriers to
Yes.
being able to
Hmm.
solve it at all.
Right.
Um, So I know, MSU has a program where they have students going back and uploading, paper files and
Right.
documents to a database that have, been helping a lot of cold cases and things like that. But
Right.
that stuff takes time and, the police and all of those other agencies just don't have time to go backlog when they have all of these other active cases.
Right. Very good. Yeah, you make a good point that we might look at, I'm not saying it would necessarily be solved. We can never guarantee that. But certainly, if this was a disappearance that happened, let's just pick a year 2010 with the Facebook, and cell phones and everything else, we certainly would know a lot more about her disappearance. I'm not saying I would never guarantee anybody that anything would be solved, but it would certainly have a lot more information, and we might have a better insight into actually what happened. So, Nikki, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
It's certainly true. Technology changes everything. You're totally right.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Let's move on to that day. Back to you, Michelle. Um, what is your understanding of Paige's plan for that day? What was she, to get up, and then by the end of the day, what was she supposed to be doing that day?
Well, Paige took my mom. She drove her from Okemos, where the home is, to Detroit, to the airport, because my mom was coming to Atlanta to see me and my sister, and then her new grandson,
Okay.
newer grandson. Yeah. So she was coming down to Atlanta for the weekend, or maybe a little longer, I don't recall. And to see family. And so Paige drove my mom in my mom's company car. Paige had a sports car that was too small, couldn't fit the luggage in. So my mom said, "Well, we'll just take my company car." So she drove my mom to the Detroit airport, dropped her off, and then she went. Paige drove to Canton, Michigan, which is outside Detroit, and went to a park to visit a friend, and I think her young children as well. They had a picnic, hung out for a while.
Okay.
Then she left the park and went, looks like apparently it stopped at like a gas station party store. Whether she got gas, who knows? Probably so. And then she also got a beer, purchased a beer at that location,
Okay.
one single beer, and got back on the road to head to her fiance's ball game. She was due at the ball game late afternoon at some point. I don't know what time, but never made it. She made it 3/4 of the way home.
Was this softball game going to be taking place back at Okemos, or at least in the general area?
In the general area. I couldn't tell you where, but
All right,
general
so
area.
all right, so it was a big, huge round trip, and I am doing a map analysis video that'll be on YouTube that everybody can see where I will go through these locations. But so it's certainly a big round trip. I saw that from Okemos to the Detroit airport, somewhere
90,
around
90 miles.
yeah, it's like an hour and a
But
half. So it's like a 3 hour round trip. But we have to remember she actually stopped to see this friend of hers for at least a little while.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And was it ever determined where she stopped for that beer that day? Was the convenience store like near the park, or do you know?
Well, I don't exactly know personally, but it was because at the time I believe they interviewed the woman that worked there. The
Hmm.
place is not in existence anymore.
Okay.
It's something else now. So
Okay.
but if I recall properly, I think that they did interview, the person that was there, because she
Mhm.
even said, "Hey, I love your outfit," or her necklace or something Paige was wearing, and remembered that vividly. And
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
And the reason they know that she stopped for that beer because the beer was in the car when they found the
correct.
car, right? All right, we'll
Mhm.
get to that. And do you know if this convenience store, do you remember, was it like close to the park, or
I
do
don't
you
know.
remember? Don't remember.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, totally fine.
Yeah.
That friend, have you ever had a chance to talk? Did you have a chance to talk to that friend that day, from that day? What was the conversation?
No, I did not. I didn't know her. I mean, it was one of Paige's, my big sister's friends from high school that I
Mhm.
never really knew well
Okay.
at all. But always in the mix with the girlfriends, kind of thing.
Okay.
Um, but again, she was so much older than I was, so
Right,
I
right.
didn't get to.
Yeah, 6 years,
When you're that age, that's a big
yeah,
time. You big difference of age when
right.
you're that age. So,
Maybe the age we are now, it does the six
mhm,
years, although I wouldn't mind being 46 again, but okay.
right?
All right, so we don't know, as far as you know, though, Paige, in talking to this friend, didn't say anything like, you know what, I'm having, once again, any fears in her life, any stalking issues, anything like that. Nothing like that's come up.
Not that I'm aware of at all. No. I think
Okay.
that would have come out. We would have known that by now
I
through,
think so too, but these are just
I
the
would think
questions.
that would,
Yeah,
yeah.
these are just the questions I have to make sure I cover all the bases, and
Hmm.
not to. use a pun, given that she was headed
No,
to a
but it makes
softball
me
game.
think too. I'm like, I should
Yeah.
know some of these things, but I'm like, well, I don't know everything, you know?
Okay. Regarding this plan to take your mother to the airport that day, was that something that was planned? Like, this is something that probably had been planned. This wasn't a spur of the moment thing. This was probably a trip that had been planned weeks in advance.
I would say, yeah, for sure in advance, because, you couldn't just book your own ticket. You had to go through an agency and all
Right.
that kind of thing. And
Right. Okay. So she doesn't get to this softball game. And what is your understanding about what happens next? Does the fiance decide to play in the softball game, or do he says, "Hey, my fiance is not here. I got to go find her"? Do we know what he and everybody else did when she didn't show up for the game on time?
I don't know the exact event timing of events, but
Mhm.
whether it was during the game, whether it was after the game, he kind of kept looking for her, is what I was told in the stands, kind of thing, looking for his fiance, and she never made it back.
Okay.
And so at that point, I know we started getting phone calls when in Atlanta at my sister's house where we
Mm.
were all staying. Um, and he's like, was she gonna do something else? Like, did she mention anything? And my mom was like, no, she was supposed to, drop me off, go to the picnic, and then come to your game.
Okay. All right. So it
And
was the
so
fiance that kind of got the ball rolling on this, that she's not
definitely,
there, and then I
yeah,
don't know if he went to a payphone or whatever in 1990, but somehow he ends up
yeah,
calling people, trying to
mm-hmm,
figure out if they've heard from Paige. Okay.
mm-hmm.
And what do you know about? Do you specifically remember where you were when you heard that Paige hadn't showed up for that softball game?
Well, we were all together at my sister's
Oh,
house in
okay,
Atlanta. Yeah. So there were
okay,
5 or 6 of us together with the new baby and just
wow,
having dinner, hanging out.
okay,
And, and first got the call. We're like, oh, she must have just changed her mind and done something else. We didn't think, immediately that was, something, really off the wall. I mean, we didn't have cell phones then. So maybe she did
right,
just decide to go do something else and go home or something after that.
right,
But I think Steve did go back to their home where they were living,
hmm,
realized she wasn't there either.
okay,
And then events started
yeah,
coming together. Then we started getting really nervous because
yeah,
it wasn't like her to just not be around when
of
she's
course.
supposed to be.
And given that what Nikki brought up before about technology in the 21st century, this would be a whole different,
Oh,
sequence of events, right? Right, Nikki.
yes.
I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure Nikki, you being involved in this, you've probably gone through this many times in your own head. If this happens now, that people are calling her phone, etc. Right? You've probably played
Right.
out
I
that
mean, if
scenario many
she
times.
would have had her phone, there's all of that GPS tracking, something super simple. If she went missing, and if she had her phone on her, you can kind of see, and track those movements. Same with, DNA testing of the
Yeah.
vehicle and,
Right.
all sorts of different things. The way that, her case was portrayed to the media, they had to handwrite and handprint flyers, whereas, we could just share this throughout the media immediately on Facebook and everywhere else and
Right.
get the word spread a lot faster.
Right. Even as something as simple, he could have, if he had a cell phone, he could have called her during the game. Hey, where are you? And when she
Yeah,
doesn't answer, once again, everything gets started just a little bit quicker. You know?
right.
Mm-hmm.
Right, right. Okay, very good. So what, the way you remember it, Michelle, of course, you're all that most of her family's down there in Georgia. I should say up there in Georgia, given that I'm in Florida. But what do you do for that rest of the day? Is there any panic yet, or
Well,
what?
it was evening. It was, late afternoon, early evening. It wasn't like a whole day. Um, it wasn't a whole day that we didn't know she wasn't where she was supposed to be. It was evening time. I would say mid-evening, early to mid-evening that we, got the call from Steve, and he's like, oh, is she mad at me? Where'd she go? And we're like, I don't know. Nobody knew.
Right.
Nobody knew. And
Okay.
so, yeah. So after he went home to where she was living with him at his house, I'm told then he realized she wasn't there. So he called us back in Atlanta and said she's not at the house.
Wow. Oh.
The call. And so my mom said, well, go to my house and listen to the voicemail, because the machine in the kitchen, because you couldn't just call, or my mom wasn't sure how to do that back then,
Yeah.
to listen from a different phone. So anyway, he got to my mom's house, and my mom said, well, he's like, well, it's locked. None of the neighbors had a key, any of that. So she said, well, break a small window where you can reach around.
Wow.
So he did,
Wow.
and yep. And then he listened to the machine, and there was a call from Livingston County Sheriff's Department.
Already.
Well,
So
there
even
was,
before,
yes.
so even
Mhm.
before there was no missing persons report or anything else filed yet. Already there was this message on the answering machine.
Correct. And the
Wow.
answering machine,
Okay. I don't know
because
if I
it
knew
was my
that.
mom's company car.
Right. Okay.
So Paige was not even anything in the mix. They just said, hey, we have your car, was found on the side of the freeway. Gives me goosebumps right now.
Yeah.
And that's when, we knew something was not right at all.
Right.
And they
And
were
on
low
that message,
staff.
did he even say, you know what, we found the car. Not only did we find the car, but it was sitting here idling. Was that?
I don't know what was actually said. They just said, I think they said, we have your company car. It was at the side of the freeway. They, I would think they would have said running, but I don't know. I don't
Okay.
know. Yeah.
Okay. And was it Steve or one of you who officially did the paperwork for her missing persons case? Of course, he's the one that's there. I mean, it sounds to me like he's, of course, we always take a really close look at fiancés and husbands of missing and
Mm-hmm.
boyfriends of missing. Let's just admit it. But it
Yep.
seems like he's doing these things, that you're asking him, your family's asking him to do. Is he then the
Mm-hmm.
one who filed the missing persons report, like gave the information, or someone else?
I don't know. I don't know if it was my mom over the phone, because at that point we still didn't know. I
Right.
mean, we knew that was really strange. It was
Of
not
course.
normal at all.
Right.
But we didn't really know, was she what I mean, obviously she wasn't in the car, so she's missing, but it might have been the next day
Yeah.
even. I just
I
remember
wouldn't be
a lot of
surprised.
running around, because there was a lot of low staff. It was a holiday weekend at the, Livingston County. They didn't have, everyone wasn't on staff. And that's why the car sat there for quite a while, idling.
Okay. All right. So that is what happened in that day and then into the next day. That this car is found there, and it wasn't even found due to anybody calling it in. It was just sitting there by itself. And as we know,
Mm-hmm.
once in a while, not every car that's on the side of a highway, but depending on the circumstances, a
Mm-hmm.
police officer will pull over, especially if a car's been sitting there for a little long.
Yeah.
So what's going on here, and of course they check the registration. That's how they find out, who the driver is. Maybe they
Mm-hmm.
even got in there, or found some sort of information and tracked your mother's number down there in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that's how this disappearance starts. Nikki, I'm now going to bring you back into this conversation. And, how did you decide, to get involved with this? Is this something that before you were actually an adult, this is something you said, you know what, I'm going to take an interest in this when I become old enough? Being that your mother's here watching this, you can answer. Did you do this with your mother's approval? Is this something you got in your head? This is something I really want to get involved in. Talk a little bit about that before we get into the real deeper issues of this disappearance.
Yeah, I guess I didn't exactly ask for approval, but didn't really feel like I needed to.
Nope.
It's kind of a all hands on deck situation. So when I really understood it and I was like, wow, okay, like, what can I do to help? Like, I want to learn more about it. So that's when I started really asking her 1.5 million questions and,
Uh-huh.
sharing that information with a lot of people that I knew and just getting all of the information about the case and, theorizing and thinking, what if
Yeah.
this or that or something like that, and just starting all of those conversations and really learning about the case.
And when did this start happening?
Um, I feel like high school, maybe ninth-ish grade, maybe 10th
Okay.
grade.
Okay. I don't know how old you are. Can you give us maybe a year just to give us an idea how many years you've been
So
involved?
like 2011,
All
2010,
right.
2011.
Wow. Oh, so over 10 years now. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great. Okay. Over 10 years. And is this one of those things in learning about, of course, your mother, she was alive at the time. She lived it, the very second by second, being in Atlanta, getting that call, and being a part of all of that. For
Mhm.
you, of course, you did not live it, but in the process of you working on Paige's disappearance, have you like read about a lot of other disappearances, whether it's in Michigan or, to kind of educate yourself, or has this been how would you explain how you've gone about doing this?
So not always specifically disappearances, but for a lot of forensic psychology, criminology, those types of things, thinking back to like, okay, we don't have,
Yeah,
her body has never been found. So
right.
kind of trying to figure out how to solve the crime from the other perspective of figuring out, the type of person that might do that or something like
Mhm.
that. So,
All right. Exactly. Why is it that some, if, and I'm not, we, on this podcast, we do not push anybody in any particular direction, but just as an example, if somebody did cause foul play and that's the reason Paige went missing, why did the person choose to hide her? Of course, we know in a lot of murders, the bodies are left behind. For Paige, why was she taken seemingly? Stuff like that, right?
yeah.
Right, like that. Okay, very good. All right, let's now move on to the rest of the disappearance. And of course, we have to start with that car. And I'm going to try to involve both of you in this conversation. I'll start with you, Michelle. This location, as I've read, it was right there on I-96. Would you say that would have been on the way home? Is that the proper route she should have been on going home that day?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how you get from there to here. Um,
Okay.
Perfect route.
All right. So that makes
Nothing
all the sense.
unusual.
Okay, right. It makes sense going from Canton, Michigan to
Hmm.
Okemos, Michigan. That is the highway you'd have to be on.
Correct.
Okay. Now for you, Nikki, I'll ask you some questions. What right there in the outline. Any damage? We already talked about it was running, but do we know anything about how much gas was left in it? Anything unusual at the car that you've been able to find out over the past 10 plus years of devoting your life to this?
Nothing was ever found because they did, look that over as a big concern, of a
Mhm.
reason why she might have pulled over.
Yeah.
So, there was nothing wrong with it. And the fact that it was idling and still running kind of speaks for itself. There wasn't anything mechanically wrong with it.
Mhm. No, nothing, for example, like a tire being flat, anything like that.
No.
No. Okay. Once again, I'll direct this to you, Nikki. What about the interior? What have you learned about things regarding the interior of the car? What was there? We've talked about this bottle of beer, or maybe can of beer that was there. Was it there? What about, other things that were still in the
Yeah.
car?
I
Please.
believe it was a can of beer. But there was also her purse and her shoes in there. So
Hmm.
whether she had her shoes on and took them off or wasn't wearing them at all while she was
Mhm.
driving, that's kind of unknown at this point.
Okay.
But with her person there, thinking if there was something wrong with the car and she needed to walk to the gas station because the car couldn't move any further or something like
Yeah.
that, she would have brought those items with her.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
Okay. So I guess what we're also saying is being that the purse was there, there doesn't seem to be a robbery component to this, right?
Right.
Okay. Her purse was there, but is your understanding, Nikki, that, for example, there cash in it, were credit cards in it, those things?
I don't know specifically offhand.
Mhm.
And then as far as the rest of the car goes, I think it was pretty empty for the most part because it was the company car. So it's not like, you know, how much stuff I have in the back of my car, just
Ah,
random other things that are there. It
uh,
was a pretty, clean and well kept car.
Okay, very good. Right. We have to remember that. It's very important to remember for everybody that this was not technically Paige's mother's car. It was a car that was given to her for her job, whatever job that was, and it's really not important, I don't think, to this disappearance. All right, so there's stuff in there. Doesn't seem like there was any violence. Maybe I'll ask you going back to Michelle. Have you ever heard anything put forth by anyone saying, were there signs that maybe somebody else could have been in the car with her? Being that, could she have picked somebody up? Has there anybody any proof that anybody else could have been in the car with her that you've heard?
From what I know, the answer to that is no. The seats were in the proper position there. Gosh, was it a two-door? I'm even doubting
Yeah.
myself for a moment. It was a two-door. And
Okay.
yeah. And so anyway, but there was like nothing was out of place. It wasn't as though someone could have been in the car or in the front seat. There was no sign that anyone was there. It would be very, very odd for my sister to pick up a hitchhiker. Like
Yeah.
this is not her style. Or who's got a style, but that's
Okay.
just nothing like we ever would have done.
Right.
We
By
knew
the
better.
time 1990, I think, came around, hitchhiking was kind of,
Yeah, that was kind
it
of
was
yeah.
like a 50s, 60s, and 70s type of thing. By the 80s, I
Mm,
think people started to figure out, this is a little strange and
yep,
letting,
shady.
and yeah, and I'm just going to get, people hitchhiking, who knows, they might get in the wrong with the wrong person, or people picking
Hmm.
up hitchhikers, they might pick up the wrong person. Okay. Um, all right. So going back to you, Nikki, has it ever been determined how long the car had been sitting there? And we haven't even gotten to these witnesses and everything else yet, but any determination on how long the car had been sitting there from the time, if we're to believe Paige put it there, to the time that the police officer came along? Any idea how many hours that might have been?
It was several hours because she
Hmm.
was based on the witness reports and things like that. It was determined that she went missing around 3:15, 3:20-ish.
Okay.
And then I believe it was around the time that the sun was kind of going down because there was somebody that had driven past it, thought it was weird, didn't think anything of it, and then had later driven back down that freeway and saw that it was still there, and I believe might have noticed the headlights or something that were on.
Okay. So several hours, do you mean like more than 3 hours?
Uh, maybe 3 to 5.
Three to
Yeah,
five
I
hours.
would
Okay.
say
So quite
that
a
too.
while. Quite a while.
Mhm.
And once again, Nikki, your understanding. So when it came to this, the car being, of course, we know it got called in by the Livingston County Sheriff's Office. Was this, once again, was this a situation that, as either one of you can answer this, just so we're clear on this, was this a situation where the policeman himself pulled over, or was it called in by somebody who then, said, what, there's just been cars sitting there all day. I think somebody should go check it out. Either one of you can answer that. Maybe I'll go back to Michelle. What is your understanding regarding that?
Kind of goes both ways, actually. I don't
That's it.
know exactly what happened. Obviously, I wasn't there, but
Mhm.
as far as I know, that there had been calls about a car at the side of the road,
Okay.
several calls. That's what I understand. And then again, like Nikki had mentioned, someone else had traveled that route and was going back that same route and thought it was odd that the car was still there, but the lights were on because over time and it started getting dark and maybe they're automatic lights. I don't,
Okay.
not sure,
All right.
but
N-
that's when they finally, because they were, as far as I remember, is the Livingston County was a little short-handed. It was a holiday weekend.
Yeah.
So that, there was a car at the side of the road earlier. It wasn't much to really, you know,
Mhm.
get right on until later it was still there. And then they went to check it out.
Okay. So I guess maybe what we're saying then, Nikki, is that the police officer showing up at the car, it could have been just the public motivated, a driver that called it in.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of my understanding is that, it
Okay.
wasn't necessarily a police officer that stopped to check it out, but after reports came in of, hey, this is going on, then they sent somebody over to take a look.
Okay. And Nikki, over the years, have you been to that location?
Yes.
Okay. Why don't you, for the listeners, why don't you just describe this, the location, this highway? Of course, this is 2023. I don't know how much has changed in Fowlerville since then. Maybe Michelle would
Mhm.
know a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
But maybe you, in your own words, can explain, how close it was to the exit, the surrounding area.
Yeah, so it kind of just looks like the side of any highway. It was not very far from the exit. You know, you could see kind of that where you turn off on the exit, you could see that from where the car was found. So then to one side was that exit, and from what I can see at this day and age, there's a gas station that really sticks out. Fowlerville is kind of a very small town, just not really anything to it. So just, a few gas stations, McDonald's, things like that, but no big businesses per se right at that exit.
Okay. I'll go to you, Michelle. Once again, being that
Mhm.
you were around the area at the time. Fowlerville, how much has it changed since 1990 as far as size or anything else?
Well, I would say it actually has changed quite a bit. That exit itself, there's the same gas station. I mean, you could see it from the freeway. It wasn't like
Mhm.
if she had to get off on the freeway, like she wasn't sure where she was going or something. I
Yeah.
mean, it was clear there was an exit, there was gas station and a few other businesses. Now, just adjacent to that area, there are some very large companies that have come in and
Okay.
built, there's a lot of built, building that's gone on. And
Mhm.
so yeah, it's grown. It's definitely grown. It's a rural area, but a lot of business, a lot of corporations have, smaller corporations have come in that area and
Okay.
built their.
Let me just ask you this then. We've all been on the highway at one time or the other and had to go to the bathroom real bad because the big thing about this disappearance is why would she pull over to the side of the road in a
Mhm.
perfectly fine car? Now, of course, a reason that pops into my mind is you have to go to the bathroom. Is this kind of the place where you would do something like that to like run off into the weeds to go to the bathroom?
I would say no, just
Okay.
because there were businesses right there, like you could visually see them from the freeway.
Okay.
Um, you know, that
Okay.
would be that doesn't make sense. And then without
Okay.
your shoes, I don't know.
Okay.
That
Good
I don't
point
think
then.
there was enough trees right off the highway that to give you any protection from the passing cars.
Right, a little
Yeah.
little privacy, right?
Yeah, it was like
Yeah.
a ditch area, but not like, yeah, not trees,
Okay,
such.
very good. Let's move on to this, and I'll ask you of this, Nikki, as best as you can tell. You've been working on this. When did the witnesses start coming in? Not just about the car, but about people seeing Paige seemingly at the car talking to a man in a maroon van. How long after this did that all start? As best as you can tell.
I would say fairly immediate. Um, because those are people that had just been driving down that highway. If you were to ask me about the last time I drove down the highway, what I remember, that wouldn't be something that stuck out.
Mhm. Okay, so is this a situation, the way you understand it, Nikki, that okay, she's missing, word gets out, and then all these people start calling in. Well, you know what? I remember that car, and I remember
Yeah.
that woman. A situation like that.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Um, Michelle, regarding this man or men, how that we have my understanding and having being that both of you know that I spoke to the sergeant who is now in charge of Paige's disappearance. He told me that he has it in his records. 41 people called it in to say that they saw Paige talking to someone on the side of the road that day. But what is your understanding about the person? Is some people say one, some people say two men. What is your understanding, Michelle?
Well, it depends who you talk to.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Lots of people called and said there was one man, talking to her between the cars. Some people said there were two. There were, different ethnicities, from different people, but with the composites that they came up with, the composite drawings that they came up with, I they two is what I think the majority. I might be wrong on that, but two people, two men. And
I think all of those tips are really true because as you're passing by, they might have only seen one person, and then a couple moments later, another person comes out and a different person saw that many people. So
very well, very good point. Very well could be. And I should have asked you this, Michelle, when this all started getting rolling and Paige didn't show up after just a few hours, did all of you automatically go back to Michigan, or were all your plans changed, or what?
Oh yeah, they changed. But we couldn't get a flight out of Atlanta because it was Memorial Day weekend. All the flights were full and no one had any room. So my oldest sister, Tammy, worked for a company and they had a Learjet.
Wow.
And her company, the CEO sent the Learjet down to pick us up in Atlanta and brought us back. It was, I mean, it was crazy. It was amazing. Otherwise, it could have been days before we, I think it was the next day when we got out.
Okay. All right. So fairly quickly.
I think it was just one day. I think it was one day.
Wow. That's it was very nice of the owner of that
Oh,
company.
it was incredible because it could have been several days or a week before we could have gotten back.
Okay. All right. And so you just jumped in. I'm guessing you met up with her fiance fairly quickly.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we all just met at the house here at my mom's house, and it was kind of like Grand Central Station because there were, media. Oh, at that point it was a little soon for media, but we got here. But between the police officers that were coming through and the investigators and people asking questions and us trying to figure out what do we do, like what do you do when someone's missing, an adult at that.
Right.
So it used to be like you have to wait 48 hours, before. It's different. Yeah, it's different now. So,
okay.
But a lot of chaos.
Nikki, regarding these witnesses, and like I said, there are many. Like I said, I don't know if we can believe all of them. My experience tells me that there are a lot of people out there who just like to infuse themselves into disappearances and they really don't know anything. But even when you get the number gets up to 41, even I might start thinking that some of them are telling the truth. But for you, Nikki, in general, what did these witnesses describe? Paige standing there, at least one guy. Were they arguing? Were they on the ground rolling around fighting? Were they having a nice conversation? Did anybody get that descriptive?
I believe I don't know how many one or more people had kind of described her talking to these men, kind of had her hands up in the air, making some sort of gestures. But at the same time, it's not quite clear because as you're driving 70 plus miles an hour down the highway, you only see that for a split second. So it's hard to really get context of was she talking with her hands or was she trying to, handle a situation and kind of diffuse something. That's all unknown at this point.
Okay. Very important question. Did anybody, though, actually see Paige getting into this other vehicle, whether through by choice or by force? Anybody see her ever get into the van?
But at the same time, if it depends on what side of the vehicle they were talking on. If they weren't talking on the side where the cars are passing and they're on the opposite side on the shoulder, then the interactions that people are seeing is very little.
Okay. Yeah, very limited.
Right. So
no one would have seen that happen if they would have moved around the side of the vehicle.
All right, to the opposite side of the berm, on the grassy side of the berm of the road. Okay. Very good. And Michelle, was anybody so descriptive so as to say what manufacturer or make or model of the van was, or do we just have maroon van or maroon SUV?
It was before SUVs, so it was a minivan, a maroon minivan. I think they checked them all out at the time because there weren't that many. I guess from what I remember, there weren't that many makes of that type of thing then.
Okay. Yeah, minivans came
But
out about 1984, 85 with Chrysler.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
maroon's a fairly popular car color.
Yeah,
So,
or was it a more boxy, type
That's my
and not
understanding
a
is that more
minivan?
boxy.
mm,
What's that?
okay.
My understanding is that it was more boxy compared to like the more rounded edges that we see now.
Yeah. Okay. So we don't know if it was a Ford, if it was a Chrysler, if it was a Mercedes. We have no idea.
Nope.
Okay. Um, the way you understand it, Michelle, now that we have this description, and we should say that these men were, the witnesses said that they were at least one black man, maybe two black men. I think they
Mm-hmm.
were all the same race. But the way you knew Paige or anybody else since then, any person matched that description, a black man or black man who drove a maroon minivan of some type. Did anybody like a certain person or man or anybody jump into anybody's mind at the time?
None.
None.
Zero.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Okay.
it was just nothing made sense.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing made sense from day one.
Okay. And what about Steve? What was he? How was he reacting to all of this? Did he offer any? Once again, I'm just gonna
Mm-hmm.
say we always have to be suspicious of these guys. I don't know. Just the way we have to be. My experience after 7 years. But how did he
Mm-hmm.
react to it? Um, did he say
Oh,
anything? Well, Paige was telling me, something about some guy. Anything like that?
not that specific at all. Nothing like that. At all. Like, I mean, he was very involved with our family and trying to do and figure out why she didn't come back. Like why this even happened. It didn't make sense based on her personality. And he was with us. He stayed here at the house. I think if I recall, I mean, he was here nearly 24/7, if not 24/7 for a while, because we had space here at the house and we just never knew who was going to be calling or checking in um and he was very very helpful,
Okay. All
super
right. So,
helpful.
so all the people who, as best you can tell, all the people who knew Paige the best, nobody could say she knew a guy driving a maroon minivan, anything like that.
None.
None, zero. Okay. This is where I'm going to jump in and do a little bit of talking now because, of course, Nikki and Michelle know this because I sent them a bunch of information. And by the way, we're doing this interview on July 13th of 2023, and this is an episode that came out on July 14th, the very next day of 2023. Anybody who listens or watches this in the future, whether it's next year or 100 years from now, that there were quite a few women getting murdered and going missing in Detroit or that general area in that general time frame. Let's just say 1986 to 1994. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
women similar to Paige who went missing or were murdered. And I'll ask you this, Michelle, were you aware of that at the time? I realized that maybe you had moved away or anything, but was your family aware that there was this Leslie Williams who was a serial killer in the area at the time, Jeff Gorton, any of that?
Not till after the fact, not till after Paige disappeared. No, I didn't know, and then I lived away on top of that, so
Okay.
no.
All right, because this is a component that I think at least has to be examined. Once again, I'll just do a little talking here. There was this woman, Dawn McGowan, who went missing, very similar to Paige's disappearance, in that her car was found, but she wasn't missing for that long, but there was the idea that maybe she got pulled over by someone pretending to be a cop and was killed. Well, it turned out Dawn McGowan was found alive not long later, and allegedly she had some type of dissociative fugue or amnesia or something like that. And to my
Mm,
knowledge, she is alive to this day. All right, so this is information that I've already sent you to, but I'm just
mm,
telling this to the listeners now. And there has been a lot made also of as the articles that I put out there for everybody to see already, before this episode came out about all these different women. Leslie Williams was certainly a serial killer, but I don't, and he was certainly not in jail at the time of Paige's disappearance. I'm just not exactly sure whether this fits his modus operandi of randomly
Mhm.
pulling over a woman on the side of the road or something like that. And then, as far as Jeff Gorton, he was connected to the Detroit airport because he actually murdered a flight attendant in a hotel at the airport. And so Paige was at the airport that day. But are we really to believe that if and he was, of course, on the loose at the time, did he really follow her that whole way from the airport? It just doesn't seem very likely.
Yeah.
But these were things, though, as both of you know, these were things that police have looked at over the years, correct? This is your understanding.
Yes, absolutely. They've
Okay.
looked into so many different, stories and theories and disappearances and trying to match something up.
hmm Okay, and as I saw a few years later, maybe 1994, they did a whole huge article with all the pictures of these women and
Mhm.
everything else that everybody can now see that I've posted. So, and some of those have been solved. Some of those killers were eventually caught. Some of them still unsolved, including, of course, Paige's disappearance. Michelle, being that you were around, she's your sister. You were around at the time. Um, any chance that Paige knew any of these women who also went missing or murdered? Has that ever even come up in the last 33 years?
I think once those stories were in the paper, I know read them and looked at them and
Mm,
asked my mom, because my mom was so involved in this case before she passed away.
yeah,
So we're trying to pick up where she left off.
yeah.
And yeah, so none of those names, not one of those names,
hmm
rang a bell, or you know Paige had a pretty tight knit group of close girlfriends in the area here, um, that she even kind of grew up with you know, high school
Even
friends.
so, no connection 33 years later that Paige has ever been connected to any of these women, even if it's something really bizarre,
No,
like, she was substituting at some school and in one of the classes, one of these missing or murdered women, that their child was in that class. Nothing like that that you know of.
not that I know of. No, no.
Okay, very good. All right, we've already talked. Paige seemingly wasn't getting stalked, being followed, anything like that. I'll move on to this, and I'll ask, being that you were around at the time, Michelle. Of course, we've talked about the fiance. His name is Steve. Um, did the police give him the once over? Did they check him out? Of course, he's at this softball game. That's a pretty good alibi, but
Mhm.
do you think that they give him a good once over back in 1990 to make sure that they could rule him out?
Yes, absolutely. I think they did. I don't know the time frame, but I would say yes, they did, and yes, they did again. I would say again and again, 4 or 5 more times over this 33 years. They, you know, uh, called him back in, and he's answered the questions. He's passed polygraphs. He's come up clear.
Okay, very good.
So yes, they did right off the bat.
Right, and what once again, we haven't used his last name. His last name's out there, but we're not going to get
Yeah.
into that here. What kind of life would you say that he has led since 1990? Any allegations that he's ever gone to jail for battery or raping a woman, anything like that to your knowledge?
Not that I know of. And again, I didn't really know him very well either. But no, not that I know of.
Okay. I'll ask
Yes.
Nikki, being that you've been
Yeah.
working on this for over 10 years, I just have to ask, have you kind of gone back and taken a second look at Steve, just seeing what he's been up to? Of course, we know everybody's information on the internet these days. If
Right.
you can't get it for free, you can pay a little bit of money, get everybody's criminal record and everything else. Being I know that because that's what I do. But for you, Nikki, if you bothered to maybe check him out and what he's done over the last 33 years to make sure that maybe he did not develop a history of abuse against women.
Um, I have looked, social media wise a couple of times, but when it comes to social media, everybody puts their best face forward. So, if there was anything inappropriate or illegal happening, I wouldn't have seen it there. And I do know that a lot of domestic and sexual violence often happens behind closed doors
Sure
and
does.
isn't always public information and isn't prosecuted terribly often, unless it's pretty severe. So,
Right.
if that happened, I don't know about it.
Okay.
So.
And I'll continue by asking you, Nikki, your work over the last 10 plus years, anything that has really, popped out to you? You working on this? For example, have you come across maybe something that, they might have missed at the time, something that you've been able to pass along to your mother, for example, um, something new, and how have you, what have you been doing to work on this? What is your kind of your mode of working on this?
Yeah, so it kind of ebbs and flows, throughout the year. We do have a Facebook page that we manage, and people, submit random tips to us that we always forward onto law enforcement. Um, so kind of going through that as well. We attend an event held by the Michigan State Police called Missing in Michigan. That's every year for families with missing people. So always reconnecting there and kind of talking more about it and spending some time on it. And the family always talks about it for the next few days after that, just a little bit more about the case and things like that. But I would say over the last 10 years, the biggest piece that has kind of stuck out was the map and letter that were left on the detective's desk back in the 90s. And that has always been a big question mark. They did a search, but it's always just kind of stuck out in our minds that, the way that it was done, there was
And why don't you expound on that a little bit more? What are you talking about, this map and everything? Please tell the listeners about that.
Yeah, so there was literally a map and a letter that was left on a detective's desk and had been filed away for a number of years. And then when case files were being revisited, that's when it was found. It wasn't initially investigated when it was found on that desk, to my understanding. So once they began looking at that, it was a very clear-cut map. Somebody that has some sort of skills or knowledge on how to draw a map, which basically it says basically X marks the spot, for lack of better words. And then there's a letter that kind of follows along with it that says, this might be a red herring, but I know some people, it wasn't somebody saying that they had did it, but they had known somebody and had all of this secondhand information. And so that's what the letter is kind of describing, what the map shows. So, and that location is off the Fowlerville exit. So whether somebody drew that up because of false interest, they wanted to, spark an investigation for not the right reasons, could have been that, could have been something. They did investigate the site, and nothing was found. So, but it's always kind of stuck out in our heads of, maybe there's more to it, but nothing that we've ever been able to identify thus
All right,
far.
I need to ask you. So, are you saying this literally or figuratively that it ended up on this desk? I mean, was it mailed, or did somebody find a way into this person's office without anybody seeing? I mean, how did it
That's
end
kind of
up?
my understanding, is that it was physically in the law enforcement office. Nobody knows how it got there. So lots of kind of random theories on how it could have gotten there, whether it was law enforcement involvement or not. Nobody knows.
Okay, Michelle, were you aware of this letter at the time when it happened back in the early '90s?
Well, not until Nikki, I don't know if you remember when it was actually taken out of the file, because originally it got from I wish my mom was here. She knows it all. And but originally the letter that was supposedly dropped off on a desk, and then it was mysteriously filed for, I don't know what, 15 years.
Yeah.
maybe not that long.
Okay.
I don't know when then it was actually found, but it was a long time. It's a
Hmm.
long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think it was 2010 or 11 when they did the search of the property. So,
Yes.
um,
Okay.
yeah, and that just goes back to the whole technology thing. If there was cameras at the police department
Yeah.
at the time, they would have
I
seen
know.
who was in and out. And
Right. Was this your understanding? How far was this away from the car? It was in Fowlerville, so it couldn't have been too far.
so it's like maybe 10 miles off
Yes.
the
Okay.
exit,
Okay. Okay.
but it goes back to more rural, dirt road.
Mhm.
Um, the end of the map kind of explains what used to be a lover's lane, where people would go and,
Mhm.
make out or smoke pot or something like that.
Okay.
It's now a little more residential, but still very dirt road, wooded area.
Okay. Your understanding, is this private property or local government property or what? Either of
It's
you can
private
answer.
property now.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So we have this letter with a map. Somebody writes it. Somebody doesn't sign, anything. Doesn't sign a name, Jane Doe, John Smith, nothing like that. It's in an envelope on the, detective's desk. I don't know what to make of that. But it doesn't look like it was mailed. It actually looked like somebody actually walked it in. Yeah, they're
From my
nodding.
understanding.
Okay. All right.
As far as we know.
I will give you my impression, just my opinion. This sounds like some sort of psychic or something that just does, I have a sensing and I'm gonna, and that's usually why people would
It's
stay
not what they
anonymous.
said in the letter, but there have been psychics over the years that
Okay.
have given tips that are far less specific.
Yeah, I'm sure there have been. Okay.
Mhm.
For both of you, you are, and this is one of those things where I think it matters if you're, a man or a woman regarding this. So I'll ask both of you. I'm guessing both of you have been on long drives by yourself in your car. Can you think of any reason why either of you would pull over to the side of the road when you're by yourself, when your car was not having any problems? Michelle, you've had a long time to think of this. Can you think of any reason?
Yeah, not many. Uh, was there something in the car? Was there a spider? Was there a bee? Was there something that like because I know my oldest sister would completely like go off the side of the road if there was a spider in the car. But I mean that's something that maybe is a possibility because it makes sense
Mm-hmm.
to me. I used to travel a lot on the freeways in different areas in Georgia and a few other states, and I would think about that, like what would make me pull over, and something in the car that scared me, or someone flashed a badge, like they call it badging, where
Yeah,
impersonator.
yeah,
Mhm.
sure. I guess the thing, it's totally, we know there are people, mostly men, who fake being cops to pull women over to rape them. Certainly.
Mhm.
I guess the big issue would be that usually it's not done in some maroon van. Usually these guys, as I talked about with Sergeant Young, usually a lot of the times these people have cars that kind of look like police cars.
Mhm.
That's how much they get into this. What about you, Nikki? I'm sure you've had a chance to drive some places by yourself for a distance.
Yeah.
Any reason you could ever imagine yourself pulling over to the side of the road in a perfectly fine working car? Of course, we already talked about going to the bathroom, but anything else?
Um, you know, the bathroom thing, sticks out. Do I think that's what happened? No.
Mhm.
Um, I would see that situation being more on like a rural road compared to a highway that has many exits, and many options for nearby bathrooms. My mom and I have been kind of talking about the um, bee or spider or whatever in the car, I guess kind of more recently as an option and
Okay.
thinking about that, like that's very realistic. And maybe if there was somebody that had followed her from the gas station, that would have been a perfect opportunity if that's what their plan was. She already pulled over on her own. Um, but other than that, there's no reason. Um, if there's no check engine light that comes on in my car, or something like that, she doesn't didn't have a cell phone, so it's not like she was pulling over to make a call or something like that.
Right. Now I should ask you, being that this was a company car, were there any stickers or words or anything on it that denoted it as a company car? Michelle, because sometimes company cars do have kind of
Yeah,
the stickers from the business or something.
I would say no.
Yeah.
I don't recall anything being on that car. Um,
Hmm.
even a license plate,
Frame or something.
frame, but not even if she did, it would have probably been a Michigan State one.
Okay.
So she
Right.
was a big fan. But
Okay.
I don't even recall that being on there.
For example, like if you rent a car, for example, from Hertz or whatever,
Mm.
they'll have a sticker right on there. Hertz, it's like advertising for them, free advertising on their cars. Nothing like that either of you have ever heard about being on that car.
No.
Okay.
No.
All right. One more thing before we get into how this has, affected both of you over the years. There was this person who was seemingly one of the witnesses who went on TV. Michelle, do you remember when this happened at the time? This witness who went on local Michigan TV and said, "Yes, I was pulling in." Do you remember that?
I remember that vividly.
Okay, tell the listeners about it, please.
Because I remember watching it on the news. Because we had every time the news would come on, would stop and watch to see if there was something that we hadn't been told. But apparently, there was a witness that saw Paige at the side of the road,
Okay.
alone, no one else, no other vehicle. Okay,
Okay.
outside the vehicle, as though maybe looking in through the windshield or the window or something. So supposedly she was outside of the car looking in, and he saw her and pulled over in front of her because he was going too fast. So he pulled
Yeah.
over in front of her and started to back up, on the side of the freeway. And
Mhm.
at that time, he claims that he sees this burgundy maroon minivan, pull up behind her. And he thinks to himself, this isn't safe. I'm backing up down the freeway. Someone else is helping her. So he pulls forward and leaves.
Okay. All
And
right.
I remember vividly too that his face was blocked out. He didn't want to be, he was very upset as well. He was, very upset that he didn't know that he was this close to something this horrific,
Right. Right.
and he could have changed everything by stopping.
And I guess what it also means is, and once again, for both of you, the way you understand the witnesses, is that what they described, that her car was in front of the van, or was the van in front of her car? Do you remember?
Her car was in front of the van.
In front of the van. So I
Correct.
guess I guess that wouldn't then mean that she pulled to the side of the road first.
Mm-hmm.
That's generally what we think when we see something like that. Okay, so we have this guy pull over well down the road. He starts backing up, but then another person seemingly comes in and pulls in behind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I still have a lot of questions regarding it. We don't theorize too much, and so I'm going to just stay away from it for public and not to share that with you behind the scenes. I think I've already kind of said some things through Messenger between the three of us regarding that anyway. All right, so there was this person who went on TV. The listeners should know that I did talk to the sergeant from Livingston County Sheriff's Office about this. He has no idea who that person is. Whoever that witness was that went on TV or came forward, or whoever, at least the officer that I spoke to says, I don't know who that person was. So
Mm-hmm.
it was not documented. Might be one of those 40 some witnesses, but I don't know if they could pick that person's name out of any of them. So just something to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go to you first, Nikki, on this. How has this affected you working on this for the last 10 plus years?
Um, I guess a few different ways. It's kind of it guided me in the way that I chose my career path. I got my degree in criminal justice, knowing that I wanted to learn more about the system, how investigations work, and a big dream of maybe being able to help others in
Yeah.
similar situations, having my firsthand experience.
Right.
So, if this had never happened, would I be doing the same thing? I couldn't tell you.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but, I kind of feel that, I don't know, I just having this experience, I feel like I can do a lot more to help others. And no, I don't work in missing persons, but I do work in victim services. So, I love what I do, and I think having that experience kind of helps that.
Okay. So you got a career, I don't need to get, so you have a career in criminal justice. I don't need to, go into the deep depths of that, but that's what you do for a living now?
Yes.
You do. Fantastic. Interesting. Okay, very good. For you, Michelle, and if you want to speak for, of course, your sisters, and I understand that your mother is deceased now, if you could speak for all of them, how did it affect your mother and the rest of you, of course, up until this day?
Well, that's a loaded question. It affected all of us similarly, but at different times. Like we didn't all react or not react or been upset or engaged all at the same time. Like it was over the years, it was kind of like a roller coaster. My mom for sure was she was a huge advocate she became a huge advocate for families of those that had a missing person. And she just dove into that, and that was her release to help other people. Yet she was our liaison discussing anything with our cold case team. So there were years that went by that I didn't ever talk to our cold case team. I would ask my mom something, hey, can you ask them this? I thought about that, or, that kind of thing. But until she passed away in 2017, that's when we had to step up to the plate,
Mhm.
and we knew she did so much with so many different groups, advocating for the missing. But it's taken three of us, family members, to really carry that on, and we're still missing pieces. People ask us things. I'm like, I don't know, but my mom would know. I don't
Yeah.
know the answer to all these questions because she didn't tell us everything unless it was something that needed to be discussed.
Hmm. Right.
So um, we've all kind of gone our own ways in being involved, yet from afar. Nikki and I are most definitely in for the hall. We're not, we fill the others in,
Yeah.
as needed and bounce things off each other. But Nikki and I really have taken on a good bit of this regular, uh, regular communication.
Right.
My
Okay.
mom was a squeaky wheel. They always called her the squeaky wheel,
Uh-huh.
and I'm trying to keep up with that. So,
Okay.
you know,
I do have to ask because it hasn't been come up in this conversation at all. What about your father?
he passed away in 1994, so
Okay.
4 years after Paige disappeared, and his health was very poor at the time. But he was in law enforcement.
Was he?
Over the years, worked for the state, licensing and regulations for the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years of his career. But earlier on, he was a Michigan State University police officer, and just taught us a few things along the way. Uh,
Hmm.
but he wanted to be more involved with the case, but he wasn't able to do that.
Okay.
And he tried, and he did what he could, and he he was a mess. It broke him.
Yeah.
It broke him.
Right. I hear a lot about that. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Nikki, do you have a Facebook page set up for pages or disappearance or anything else, a website, whatever? If so, why don't you give out all of those places right now?
Yeah, so at this point, we're only on Facebook. The name of the page is Paige Renkoski Missing 52490. Never give up. And we just kind of share. things like this, media posts, every year, a lot of the media will revisit her case on the anniversary of her disappearance. So, sometimes we'll do interviews for that or just different things. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of updates on the case. I would love to share some, but that's not necessarily the focus of the case. It's more just to spread awareness and, if anybody has any information, there is information on how to get in touch with the Livingston County Sheriff's Department. But people always kind of send us messages, and some are more tip related and some are more just theories that they want to bounce off of us. But it's just another outlet. If they aren't comfortable reaching out to law enforcement, we can still forward along that information.
Okay. All right, very good. Why don't you give the Facebook page name out one more time, please, Nikki?
Paige Renkoski, missing 52490. Never give up.
Okay, very good. And we'll finish with Michelle. So, Nikki, any final words before we complete this interview?
I just want to say thank you for, taking interest in this case. We never really say no to anybody that wants to talk about it, because the more people that know and know that the case is still active and being talked about, the bigger the chance that something, credible information might come forward. That's our hope. So that's why we continue to do things like this. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And Michelle, any final words before we complete this interview?
Well, again, like Nikki just said, we appreciate you getting the word out that there are so many missing people. I mean, even in Michigan right now, there's over 4,000 missing people in the state of Michigan. And I mean, everybody wants answers. And so we're going to keep, doing different interviews and checking things out and passing along tips that we get through that website. And, we're not going to give up. It's over the years, we've had some people say, well, gosh, it's been so long. And, when does it end, kind of thing. I mean, they didn't really say that, but, that's kind of, and I'm like, it doesn't end. I mean, it doesn't. No.
It's an ambiguous loss.
Yeah.
Big question mark that you can't
That's
quite
right.
grieve and move forward from, because you don't have an answer.
Yeah.
And you
Ambiguous
can't have
loss.
a funeral and, get past that grieving point when it's unsolved. So
That's
I do
ambiguous.
appreciate.
Yeah. Please.
What's that?
I was going to say ambiguous loss. That is a term that my good friend Dr. Telesco at Nova Southeastern University, who is a criminal justice professor there, uses. When I appear on her show, her YouTube show, talking about disappearance, the ambiguous loss. That's a very common term. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to give you a little bit of kudos for all of the, research and thought that you've put into this, because I know there's plenty of podcasts and things like that that already exist on the case of people that
Yes.
have never, reached out or done much research at all. So, all of the fact checking and things like that has been really great.
You're very welcome. And as everybody knows who's listening, we don't cover disappearances on Unfound unless I can talk to somebody who's actually knowledgeable. You both get to bring your experiences, your knowledge. You are the experts on Paige's disappearance. I'm not. I'm kind of an expert on disappearances as a whole. And my job is just to extract as much information out of both of you in a very orderly manner. And so, of course, my job, I love looking into some of these things for, families, because sometimes they don't have the expertise or, the experience, to do so. So I'm
Sometimes
happy.
it's exhausting.
Yeah, it can be. But as you know, just looking into all of those other women and, looking at the circumstances of their disappearances and murders, I don't know if anybody's ever done that for you before, but, I sent that to you with the list and just my insight, into them, and maybe that can help you in some way. I'm not inclined to believe any of them are connected to Paige's disappearance, but maybe there'll be a couple things there maybe that might catch your eye that are worth looking into. But I appreciate you both being on this episode of Unfound.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And that was my July 13th, 2023 interview with Michelle Hollis, sister of Paige Renkoski, and Nikki Hollis, niece of Paige. I thank them for appearing on both audio and video for this episode. I made a map analysis video so all of you can understand the locations that are very important to this disappearance, including where the car was idling. You can find that video now on the Unfound YouTube channel. Before I get into my summation, I need to thank Sergeant Young of the Livingston County Sheriff's Department. Michelle and Nikki recommended that I speak to him, and he and I had 2 very productive calls, and I incorporated much of what he told me into the interview outline. To be clear, Sergeant Young is very new to the investigation, so please do not blame him for there still being no resolution to Paige's disappearance. On the subject of talking to Sergeant Young, I first want to go over 2 points that came up in my discussion with him that are still bouncing around in my brain. Then I will go back to the theme of this episode of Paige's disappearance being very unique. Okay, the 2 points. Number 1, Sergeant Young told me that according to the paperwork, 41 witnesses eventually came forward to say they saw Paige on the side of the road with at least one man. You know how I doubt eyewitnesses. But even I, with that number, have to start believing that yes, Paige really was standing there on the side of the road with someone. Even if 3/4 of those people are lying, that's still 10 people, which is considerable. I bring this up because I have to admit that after my first perusal of the public information on this disappearance, I really had my doubts whether Paige left the car there. Why? Well, I'll get to that in a bit. Then there's point number 2, once again coming from my talk with Sergeant Young. Despite 41 people coming forward to say they saw Paige with at least one man on the side of the road, not one of the 41 saw her get into the van, not getting in easily or forcefully or carried or anything else. Not one. So I ask you, the audience, did the guy or guys time it perfectly so as to abduct Paige when no cars were passing by? Or did Paige just happen to get into the van willingly at a time when no cars passed by? Or, dare I say, were Paige, the van, and the men just a figment of everybody's imagination? And could this all be confirmation bias set up by the guy who went on TV to talk about how he pulled over and saw the van pull in behind him next to Paige's vehicle? What choice do you like? As for the theme of this episode and how unique Paige's disappearance is, first, there were many disappearances and murders of women in the Detroit area back at that time. I went through all of them personally. The only one that was close to being like Paige's was the disappearance of Dawn McGowan. Is that name familiar? It might be. She went missing from Michigan in 1994, but was found alive in Kentucky a week later, seemingly not knowing who she was, after suffering some kind of amnesiatic episode. And yes, during the time she was missing, police did put it out there that Dawn could have been pulled over by someone posing as an officer. Of course, that's not what happened. I bring this up because a popular theory to this day is that Paige was pulled over by someone posing as a police officer. But also on the topic of uniqueness, if Paige's car had a flat tire, or had been wrecked, or had been found on a road not on the route home, or had been found on a logging road, think how many disappearances Paige's would be like. Milda McQuillan, Mara Murray, David Hardy Jr., Greg Brooks, Jeremy Burt, Rebecca Henderson. The unfound list goes on and on and on. But given that Paige's vehicle was in working order, idling, and on the way home, Not to mention that her fiancé seems to have a pretty good alibi. That is all it takes for a disappearance to be put in the league of their own category. Yep, certainly one of a kind. If you'd like to listen to and or read my deeper analysis into the disappearance of Paige Renkoski, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast and sign up to partake in the Unfound blog. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.